When you wrote your presentation, first question, did you use IT?
I did, yeah.
You did. So did you take a projector and?
No, not IT in that sense. Sorry, I actually filmed myself because I know that I sometimes fidget. I know sometimes, so I did a sort of dry run through in my. I've got a cabinet in my garden which I've got to study. So.
So you filmed yourself?
I did. My wife sort of threw some curveballs at me, literally. I think sometimes. Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't take a PowerPoint or anything?
It's almost like minimising that sort of, other things to think about. All I took was a handout with my kind of main points on to be able to sort of leave in case I ran out of time.
Was your handout what you'd written on the form?
Yes, it was. I mean, it followed that. I didn't add anything into it other than just to make sure that there was something. There was two people I knew obviously from my cohorts behind me, and one of the ladies had got a sort of cardboard sort of prop that she had brought to sort of illustrate. It was kind of like strange things in the middle and arrows and things. I must be an art teacher, I don't know, but I'm a very dull history teacher. And the other guy had bought the projector and stuff, and I started panicking because the cable wouldn't reach the room. And you just want to cut all those things out as you would on an interview anyway. And to be honest, he did actually say himself, I think it's going to detract from what I want to actually try and say. So I just wanted to sit there with a couple of cue cards as we would anyway, and just sort of sit and just say that, this is my presentation.
And did you present mostly from the perspective of competencies?
It was, yeah. And what was interesting is that they took me off then on questions. So from what they wanted to sort of have lots and lots of practical examples all the time. They wanted to move it from the theoretical side of what I was trying to say. So I was trying to reference people that had interested me in the reading. I sort of went on that line for a while, and then they would say, right, okay, that's fine, we know what Simic says, but actually, what do you do then to actually, go to the why and the how and the what, and give me a practical example of that working
so a practical example of what you've done?
Absolutely, yeah.
To use that piece of research
yeah,
or that piece of inspirational writing.
He did say, yeah, I'm a bit of a fan of Fulham, and he kept saying, right, you keep mentioning Fulham, he said, so tell me, how has that then been sort of practiced in your everyday sort of experiences? If you're saying that Fulham empowers people and talks about building leadership capacity, give me an example of that.
So could you?
Straight away, I think about middle leaders, and I'm thinking about giving them budget responsibility. So yeah, straight away it's kind of. But I like that because actually then you did really start to think about, if you're going to sort of reference people or reference educational sort of leadership ideas, you need to be able to show that you're not just. And I've actually found it gives me a lot more credibility in the staff room because my predecessors seemed to sort of, talk about sort of educational ideas, and then the reality would be, well, we'll talk about distributive leadership, but it's still very hierarchical, and we're not actually getting any. So I didn't want to fall into that trap. So I do find, I'm a couple of things with Andy Book at the moment on the discretionary effort. We want people to buy in, we want people to go the extra mile. So, we were able to reference that, and I think it's kind of carried on in the practice. So I hope it will carry on still.
So would you recommend then that people have a range of examples of things that they've done that they could apply to perhaps a number of different questions?
I think with the competency we probably get bogged down with thinking if we fill that. It's almost like you want to fill the 9 and say you've done it, but actually I think in the interview the very experienced head teachers wanted you to kind of show that it went beyond just you filling in a process, and actually the NPQH is a very practical course, and it was about actually how have you used that to become a senior leader and a head teacher, and how has that been sort of used in your practice to make you a more accomplished senior leader. So that was useful, and as I say, it made me really think not just of the time as a Kirkcaldy deputy head for the NPQH, but actually the last 3 months as an actual head teacher at Wyedean. So
okay, so you could expect then to need to give examples of something around strategic leadership, personal drive and accountability, resilience and emotional maturity, which is also something they picked up from
They picked up on emotional maturity, and when you actually hear that, it makes it sound as if you're a baby and you've kind of thrown toys out of the pram a few times, which I'm sure we all have. But it was because I'd kind of like, when I first read the criticism in the sense of that, and I thought, well, that's a bit harsh. I thought, passion and stuff is a good thing to have. But actually the way they turned it around and said, well, look, it was here, so how have you tempered that? Because if you're dealing with a staff where you're talking about redundancies, extremely emotive time for everybody, people lose their jobs, your credibility as a school leader to shepherd them through this and to be able to explain why you're doing it it's probably the most serious piece of leadership you'll do. Outside of serious safeguarding. He said, so if the emotional maturity is an issue, how have you addressed that? And it was quite a tough kind of line of questioning, especially because you think you're the finished product in a sense, and that it's kind of like, well, only my chair of government has the right to talk to me like this, but actually no, this is NPQH. If you're going to pass it, you need to be able to sort of show where you have improved on when you've been given the feedback. So
the key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the 9, because you've talked about efficient. You have to already have talked about efficient and effective, don't you? In
yes, you do.
Thing there. But the 8 of the 9, would you recommend that people just have something that they can use as an example?
This is
each one.
Yeah, my wife was a teacher, so I sat with Jen, and Jen got me to sort of go through all of them and give examples, just as you would prepare for an interview or something.
Okay, so have that in your mind, because what a piece of feedback someone else gave, and they gave a piece of written feedback, was when they were asked for an example, they gave the first thing that came into their heads, but actually it wasn't a very good example. And all through the rest of the interview, the panel kept on coming back to the example and saying, so when you were in that situation with your middle leaders or whatever, how did you model excellence in teaching? And the guy kept on thinking, actually, such a bad example, I can think of a much better example.
Well, I said something similar, because I said, I don't know how it came out, but I said there was an issue about, I didn't teach, I hadn't taken on teaching commitments. What I'd done, I did I did 2 critical thinking classes for more able, and instead of explaining that, saying, well, look, I'm taking year 10 and year 11 critical thinking, 4 times a week, it came out as if I was saying, well, I'm not teaching because I don't think I should be teaching anymore. So I did get that pulled out of me quite a lot, and I hadn't established it, and again, maybe that wasted some of the time where I could have perhaps explained other things better. So.
How can I ask a question? In terms of the amount of time that you gave to preparing the form that you sent off, any suggestions about that? I know it's different for everybody, but how did you manage the time around?
I've got 3 small children, 3, 5 and 7, so a crazy black coach retriever. So I literally just closed myself away as we do for these things for a weekend, and just sort of spent the time just being able to, because I think not so much not on this cohort or with Cabot, but I know of other NPQH sort of colleagues who have kind of tended to, if they've treated it sort of, with a little bit, oh, well, I can walk in, and it's like, it's sort of essay kind of thing, I can do it at 3 o'clock in the morning and turn up at 9. I think that's wrong, and I think it shows. I thought, right, I'm going to treat it as if it's a job interview, and I think that was probably the best thing I could do, even like, how we look professional anyway, but to be able to treat like that. So I think that was probably better preparation. It put you in the mindset for it as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
So just asking on a practical level, the actual day. So you said that you wrote minimal cue cards.
I did.
Working from this table for yourself. So they've obviously had this before. And you didn't give them anything.
Just a kind of.
You gave them a copy of what you
copy
had
of
for
just
yourself,
the points, exactly.
Your key points.
And I actually ran out of time on my presentation, and that's why I did it, knowing that I probably would run out of time. I did a couple of run-throughs, and I got it down, but I knew that if I gave, in a monologue was saying, don't go off on a tangent on this. But then I felt, as you do, this example is really powerful. I keep talking a little bit more about it, and suddenly they're going, okay, that's wonderful, and they did stop. I couldn't go on. And so therefore, well, at least it's on the sheet there, but it actually, even in my feedback from my presentation, when I actually got the NPQH sort of feedback and it was going to be awarded, it still set as a development point for me for the future. Be aware that actually keeping things to time, without boasting too much, I've done a lot of work for the British Council and Microsoft and things in Southeast Asia about a year ago. So I always think, well, I can give a good talk, but actually it's a good point, because I noticed when I spoke to parents at open evening, I really had in my head, don't go on, they don't want to hear you for 20 minutes, they want to hear you for 5, they want to hear the kids. And it's those kind of things that you sort of, in the interview it's trying to be practical, but at the same time you also want to try and sort of, really show and sell yourself, because these people can still turn around and say that you're not ready, that actually, despite you've gone through, you've task 1, task 2, you've done the course, they can still turn around and say, you aren't actually ready then for headship, or you haven't passed your NPQH because you still haven't successfully shown that you've passed the competencies. And that was told to us as well as it's probably been told to you by Jill and Bridget, that that's still part of testing you for this MPQH.
Did you take any other notes in with you? So to remind you of the examples that you had? Did you just like
I had stuff from
and then-
school to be able to sort of say, look, this is my redundancy plan, or this is my kind of, this is my, my sort of strategic plan for the school. But in the end, it's a bit like sort of preparing for it. You've read it so many times. In the end, it wasn't really wanted, because they wanted to hear you, and they were. They were good interviewers, because obviously they didn't dominate, but they just sort of teased the questions out a little bit. And
it's a bit like one of those Ofsted interviews,
a little
where
bit,
you've got a big file full of stuff to
it's
give them,
not that,
actually
yeah,
they
they
don't want
wanted
any
to,
of it. They want
but I
to
think
hear
you can
it.
sort of over-prepare from that point of view. But I actually think it is worth. I think NPQH is about knowing yourself, isn't it? As a school leader, you grow and you sort of. I mean, I when I came onto the NPQH course originally, you sort of think you're the finished product, and actually, my God, you go through a whole sort of Damascus change. But I think even at that point, it's sort of, you're still aware that there are things that need developing, and I still know now as a leader what I need to be working on, and they're very different things than they were 18 months ago. So, and I think in some respects, it is that sort of almost lifelong learning stuff that you are going to continue to face situations as a school leader that, you perhaps aren't prepared for, or that you don't know you've got the skills for when it comes and lands on your lap. So,
what did you find was the most challenging question for you personally?
I think perhaps it was just.
About?
I felt quite, because it was very difficult to go through where we'd gone through with the school for the first few months and the situation I'd inherited. So to actually talk, it was the first time I was really talking about it reflectively. You kind of live through it day to day. You kind of, when you're in the thick of things, and you go in and you have to sleep, and if you get your 3 hours or your 5 hours or whatever, and you walk your dog, and then you go in and it's there again, and your curveballs come flying. And I felt it was the first time that I'd really reflected on the last 3 months to anybody outside of my kind of, inner circle. And I hadn't really spoken to my wife.
Practice by yourself, in terms of expecting a direct question. Are you saying that?
Well, it just kind of felt difficult to kind of almost encapsulate it. It almost like to talk about it in an abstract way after you've lived, kind of been through it so kind of directly and emotionally. It was kind of strange to sort of suddenly elevate it into a sort of almost a theoretical, practical example. And I thought that was quite difficult, because what I didn't want to do on interview was almost give away, my frustrations, or sort of, having, as we've all done with colleagues, some of the inner turmoils that we have to go through, and to try and sort of present it as a polished thing that, this was all strategic.
So that was your presentation, was
yes.
about your experience. So can you remember any specific question that they asked you?
I knew it's kind of like there's no question off interview, but she started to talk to me about why I wanted to be a teacher, and I found myself getting, and that was just even before we started, so it's kind of like trying,
warming up.
a bit of warming up stuff, and that was quite difficult. I've been asked this for a long time, so, and I felt more flummoxed on that. I tried to give some real erudite answer, and it wasn't sort of just because of the holidays. It was kind of, it's sort of, and I stumbled into teaching, so it's kind of like, it was
I didn't want to go into teaching, actually. I just
No, I don't say it now. The girlfriend at the time from York University, she stayed in York to do her PhD, and I ended up working at Bootham School just to sort of get a job to stay in York. And I just loved teaching from that moment, and it was sort of. So I ended up trying to tell this story, but it came out as if this guy doesn't actually like education. He's sort of, and my real job is going to be, sort of a scuba diver. But it was sort of a strange sort of, and it was those kind of things that sometimes we think we've got set prepared answers for, but it was that sort of. Because we're expecting to ask us those big questions on, on your resource management and those kind of things, but it actually turned out to be the sort of simple stuff at the start, which was sort of, just passing the time.
Can I say that what strikes me from that is for when you're preparing, to take enough time to stop and reflect on how you changed as a leader, and to sort of step back from those immediate experiences, and because it won't just be about the facts of what you've been doing, it's about you as a leader. And
Absolutely.
I wonder if that's where we're so unused to being asked.
I think you're right. Jill, I think that's right. And that journey that you've kind of been on, I think that's very, that's good.
Because they're looking for you to be able to evidence the change in
yes.
yourself.
Yes. And also I think, not to get to that point and think, oh my goodness, it's almost over. It's the last thing to come now. And I think there was, I know talking to some of my cohort, there was a bit of an element of that about it as well. That we just want to get this through now and pass it. And I think, it was, that approach isn't healthy or helpful either to you, right? As I say, because at the end they can still turn around and say, I don't think you're ready to pass the NPQH.
When you were presenting your presentation, did you stand up? Or sit down?
Well, it was interesting because I
don't think that matters.
No, it does.
It sounded more like an interview rather than I had.
There was a table. There was tables, 3 people. It was a closed off room down in the hotel in Aztec West. And no, I sort of went to stand up and I thought, I'm going to sit for this one. I did the whole can I take my jacket off sort of thing, and then I thought, should I have said that? And you think, God, it's an interview, and you know, it's like they make you tired, your flies and all that sort of stuff, and then suddenly, I did everything.
So did it feel a bit more like an interview?
It did. The table, the
presentation?
notes, and when they'd asked the question, there was no kind of like, thank you for the answer or whatever, and then they go like, Jeff, your question, or, you know, it was kind of, and then the chair was saying, right, are there any more questions? It was no sort of, and it was like, well, thank you, Robert, now, we want to move on to, and then it was kind of very much just sort of, you know, and the timings and sort of, when they smiled, I mean, it was a professional, it was courteous, but it wasn't a kind of like, oh, don't worry, we'll give you another 5 minutes to, you know, do you want some water? None of that, it was just kind of,
But did they give you a space of time where it was your kind of monologue for that 10 minutes?
Yeah, you had your presentation, you said, right, time with this, I'll tell you when your time is up.
Okay.
And that was uninterrupted.
And that was uninterrupted, but
and
he knew I hadn't finished, so he said, I'm sorry, that's the end of that now we're going to move on to questions, and it was kind of, okay, and I thought, well, there might give me some leeway and let me finish the presentation, but, you know, again, that's part of the competencies. I haven't been able to...
How long overall was the...
Sorry?
How long overall? I know the presentation...
About an hour or so, I think. I think it went off about an hour and 10 overall, so...
Yeah, I think it's meant to be an hour and 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I think a couple of things to pick up on that Rob said. I think this is also, you get assessed on impact and influence through how you present and through how you answer the questions. So think about that. And I'm sure, I'm not an assessor there, but I'm sure you won't pass or fail whether you stand up or sit down.
No.
What you'll pass or fail on is the confidence and the impact and the way in which you present yourself. So I think Rob's suggestion, if you can, get a practice interview, be videoed, rehearse that and treat it as a continuing part of your programme and course is going to be really useful. And it's all part of that reflective learning, isn't it? Because you're presenting then to people who don't know you at all. And even with things like the school placement, you've often built a rapport with someone in the school before you present to the other people. But this is that cold, straight in.
So I do think that how you stand up or sit down.
Yes.
Don't look like Chris. It's fine here, Chris. But, and I have interviewed people for important jobs from headship up to CEO level, where they have come, when they've sat, they've sort of been like this, and it makes it look like they're not really committed to what they're saying. And however much you know that's not the case, you still just can't help thinking.
It's funny you say that, Richard. When the first interview I went on for a head of IT job somewhere, for teaching ICT while I was still in my PGC, the feedback they gave me, in fact, no, it's not even that. It's from my application for my PGC, and they commented on the way I sat that I was too laid back and too informal. And so I've worked on that. So I was just learning back there because these chairs is mad small.
Anyway, you're Rob's friend.
Exactly. So I've worked on that when I'm in an interview. I'm like,
but I think it is something to remember, isn't it? Because you form impressions of people, and headship is an awful lot. Headship is about impression, whether you like it or not.
I'm conscious for people time-wise. I don't know if there's
any other
else.
questions.
I was going to ask about the process you would have undergone to develop the presentation in the first place. Was it a case of, and it may be something completely different. In my mind, I've got two approaches which I'm thinking. One of those is to take each competency in turn and just see what stuff I've done that fits, or go through all the cool stuff I think I've done and then match it up to the competency.
I think I ended up doing the latter, and that's why they started to pull me to pieces on the sort of emotional maturity and stuff, because they knew that I was going to go for sort of nice stuff that I'd done the impact and influence and the stuff on curriculum, and I'd throw the international education there to try and show off, but they just went, no, you gabble too much, we need to talk to you about that, you know, can you handle emotional situations when you're not getting your own way, and it was all that kind of so, and maybe it's the former approach might be better. If I was doing it again, perhaps that's what I would approach it as. So,
but for your actual presentation, did you structure it in the way that it is on this sheet of paper?
I
or did you kind of tell the story of 2 or 3 pieces of work that
I
you've
did,
done
but I
which
think
met these standards?
even reflecting on it when you asked to come over today, I was thinking I probably went into the room saying, right, I'm a head teacher, therefore I've got to pass the course. And I think there's probably a little element of that in my head, a bit of arrogance to sort of go into the room. And I think quite soon, maybe it was the question about why do you want to become a teacher? Thinking, well, that's a bit kind of basic, isn't it? But that sort of disavowed me. And then actually, when it became sort of obvious that, I mean, I prepared it in a professional way that was going to be tough, but it wasn't kind of, you know, I thought, you know, they're going to just be sitting there making notes and smiling, and they'd be like, well, thank you, Mr. Ford, I'll let you know.
So were you ready to say something like, so my leadership of financial resource management is illustrated by the fact that I understand how to manage financial resources. For example, I've done blah, blah, blah.
Well, I said that I'm leading a redundancy. I wanted to sort of like try and, you know, throw the weight of it. Say, look, I'm leading a redundancy program. How much more financial resource management can you get at the moment?
Okay, so you were sort of telling a story and
but trying to sort of,
Mm.
and perhaps maybe what you described then, Chris, with the 9 competencies approach, and just sort of, you know, have it like that as a more structure might have been more comfortable for me on the day. But I mean, obviously, I sort of had enough to sort of, you know, convince. But I mean, as I say, interesting on my feedback from there, they did say to be aware of being able to get your communications and your messages succinct. And that kind of is somebody who, as I said, I've done lots of talks for different organisations at different venues around the world, and it's kind of like, well, that's quite a blow to read, but you know what, it's been the best piece of advice because I'm really conscious of my messages to staff, to parents, and it's really helped me a lot in the last year. So,
So, how many people do you think they see in a day?
well, even in the morning, so it was an hour, there was already 3 backed up. I was the first at 9, there were already 3 backed up on my course already.
So many people were there 3 hours before?
Well, I know that 2 had arrived probably early because I know they're from the Somerset sort of area, so I think they had just to get through Bristol and so they'd arrived there. It was a nice hotel to sit and have a tea and prepare. So, and I'd arrived there at 8 o'clock myself as well, knowing that it was 9 o'clock, just to be there consciously on time. And again, as we do with all these things, we don't want to rush it, we don't want to feel like we're sort of running in, you know, with the car engine still running sort of thing.
So I'm thinking that if they're seeing maybe 6 people during the day, you do need to be fairly clear and confident, don't you? Otherwise, if you're the 6th, they might be getting a bit fed up. But, you know, realistically, it is like that sometimes when you're interviewing, isn't it? By the time you get to the end of the day, you think, I think this person's going to give me something a bit, you know, to keep me on the ball.
You want to make it as easy as possible for people
You do.
to know that you
pick
the competencies, that you're capable of walking. I mean, what they're saying is if you're not already ahead, that by awarding you NPQH, that you are qualified to be ahead. That's how they will see it. Could you walk out of here if you're not ahead already or an acting head and walk into a school tomorrow, and that sort of credibility of the qualification rests with that judgment, and that's what they'll want to feel confident about. And I think all of you, you know, that will be true for all of you, and I think partly how you shape it, how you fill the form and process that you use. There isn't perhaps sometimes one straight way of doing it. You don't have to do it the same way as everybody else, but you have to be able to show that you've met the competencies, that you'd be confident managing resources, that you could hold people to account and know what's involved. Those kinds of things will be what will really matter. And I think if they're convinced that you have done some of that and that you would know what to do even if you hadn't, I think it will be fine.
Any other thoughts?
Can I just check that your write-up, they've got that in front of them,
They've got
assuming
that.
while
They've got
you're doing
they've got that.
And presumably your sponsor's commentary.
And the sponsor's comments, which is where it come from emotional maturity. So, because obviously,
quite upset with that emotional maturity.
yeah, I know. But she'd almost like passed on the different conversations for me to deal with the middle leaders. It was a QA calendar. It was like, so I was thinking, why did I have to good job?
So if we're learning from that, really carefully read your sponsors' comments and
Good
Yeah.
point.
consider
Yeah, I think
your
it is.
response
And
to
the
them.
feedback that you've got from your first task. Read it really carefully. So
Because I think Jill's point about they don't know you, what they're putting together as a competent picture is everything they've got from these sort of feedback forms, just you know, and really, you know, you do yourself a disservice if you're not sort of aware of that yourself. So
everyone who's done it has said, like you, that it feels like a very professional
Oh, it's not.
occasion, and it's not just
It's not a
sort of
rubber stamp, just a pat you on the back and say, well done, go to
So
Headteacher.
something to think about. So I hope that's been useful.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Rob.
Thank
Thank you.